Starfield is here, and with it many reviews, opinions, and guides. Make no mistake, this is a big game release. A lot of folks have been waiting, but for us space game fans, it feels like it's been a decade since we got a good space RPG. Because it has. So in this video, I'm going to give you my early impressions of the new title and where I feel it was guiding me over the first 20 hours of play, including AI interactions, gameplay styles, skills and RPG elements, exploration, quests, and general game performance. And over the next month, I will stream my journey through the game, releasing a video here and there until I'm ready to give you my full review after 100 plus hours. So if you want high quality, cinematic, space game content going forward, consider subscribing here. And if you want to know what the beginning experience of Starfield will set you up for with very light spoilers about the first 20 hours, sit back and enjoy. And thank you for coming to my Tomato Talk. As soon as I got into Starfield, I was hit with nostalgia. This is a Bethesda game. No, not Fallout 76. It's actually surprising the amount of people who expect this game to have the same performance and polish issues as the first MMO from the company. No, this is a deep RPG the likes of Oblivion and Skyrim. Even the music, oh man, the music. It felt like I was listening to Space Skyrim, and I absolutely loved it while exploring. Everything from the very first conversations, the hints of how the universe works, what citizens think of the world around them, and the incredibly in-depth looting system just reminded me of what made those older games great, and did a great job of setting the stage for the next 100 plus hours of narrative play that a player can get engrossed in. It felt very familiar, and it's probably the best way to describe this game. While Skyrim is now over a decade old, this really felt like a natural extension of it, for better or worse, depending on what you're looking for. The first quest that starts you out is actually a lot like Oblivion, contracting the space around you, making you feel a bit more claustrophobic inside before opening you out to a larger world outside, and of course beyond. The factions that you may be running into in the future, the ideals surrounding the citizens of certain locales, and even the lore behind what spaceships are being flown by which people are all subtly implied by different parties, though sometimes it's not so subtle.
Yeah, but come on. Exploring space? Who does that anymore?
And speaking of lore, Bethesda has always been one of the greatest at building the lore into their games, specifically with environmental storytelling. Data pads, audio recordings, and small narrative bits littered throughout the scene. Reminiscent of other favorites like BioShock and Mass Effect, these pieces tell the story of each location you visit. Unlike those others, however, and even past Bethesda games, there are a lot more locations. All the locations in the game do manage to have some significance in one way or another. But this is a purpose-built game. You're not going to land on a planet and explore in any direction for hours if that's what you're into. There are games for that. No Man's Sky, Star Citizen, Elite Dangerous. They'll all offer that endless exploration experience you might be looking for. But Starfield will make sure that when you land on a planet or moon, you're gonna have something to do. That's what Bethesda's games are made for, always finding something interesting. And as we'll go over later in this video, you virtually always do. But this approach comes with a lot of loading screens. Losing control to loading screens and the animations between various areas are everywhere, and they'll end up breaking up your experience. But most players likely won't care too much about this as it happens pretty quickly. The game is pretty fast at loading. But that's enough of that. Let's talk more about the specifics. Let's start with your skills and RPG elements. The character creator in this game is a joy to use. I actually still prefer the Star Citizen method of melding facial features together on a sliding scale, but that's where my preference ends. You have an absolute ton of different ways to change your character up in this game. I can't confirm yet how much each change will affect your particular path though. You can specify your faction, religion, or even medical ailments that will change your path throughout the whole game. And while there are definitely ways these attributes pop up in conversation, persuasion, and your actual in-game encounters with enemies and others, it would be hard at this point to specify to what extent it will actually affect you. Though removing specific attributes is an option, and it's built into conversations with specific vendors like medical professionals. I personally chose an attribute that makes me more effective on planetary surfaces, and it was a pleasant surprise to see that naturally referred to in a conversation and receiving an offer to remove my ailment. Skills themselves can be pre-selected based on your background, giving you an early game boost in some areas, but you'll catch up quite quickly with your other skills as you level up. Your background doesn't necessarily lock you in or out of other options. These skills maintain a nice balance of unlocking via skill points, while also requiring certain actual gameplay thresholds to be met to move past the initial stage. This keeps some level of progression and actual activity and skills outside of you just boosting your level without taking part in the gameplay. It also helps with pacing your experience through the game quite a bit. Then there is an absolute ton of opportunity in crafting, modding, and research on the various benches you find in outposts, mines, ships, and other points of interest. Along with skills, I really haven't gotten to experience these aspects of the game as much as I'd like to before speaking about their effectiveness. I hope to dig much deeper into the RPG elements of Starfield for my full review coming out later in the month. But the game loop of crafting and researching new things to improve your experience is what drives the exploration and looting that will find you trekking across various planetary surfaces throughout the game. And we'll get to that a little bit later. Now, I'm gonna be honest, this still looks very much like a Bethesda game when it comes to NPCs. They can be a bit stiff, and the faces are better than previously, but could use some improvement. They feel a little bit outdated, and the eyes especially give me some pause. I also find it eerie how often some random folks in areas will just start staring at you as you get closer to them. I mean, full on turning around to look at you for no reason. And that's kind of indicative of the whole story. This is very much a you are the hero kind of story. But they really don't need to make me every single person's number one interest as well.
Get out of here, Dusty. You're on to bigger things.
Everything that happens to you will make you feel like you are in the special seat. NPCs will trust you pretty quickly, take your advice or words to heart, and focus almost entirely on you in most scenarios. This isn't a complaint, it's simply how a game like this works if you're new to the formula. You won't be living that run-of-the-mill life outside of the main story in space. You'll always be in the hot seat, and the game will always be focused on you. But not every NPC has things to say about you. Most just have a simple response based on who and where they are, but there is a good amount of interactable NPCs with important things to say. Folks I would imagine could be significant in the future, and also folks that are probably a one-time meeting but add a good conversation to flesh out the location you're in or the mission you're on. You'll also run into potential crewmates for your ship and outpost assignments while out and about in the game in specific areas, though these aren't specifically members to take you out in the field. And while you might be able to meet members for your crew or members to go out in your party while you're out exploring the different planets, I have yet to find them. In terms of locations, I've encountered a few major spots like the capital of the United Colonies, New Atlantis, Aquila City of the Freestar Collective faction, and Neon, a major part of that same faction. In all of these locations, you'll hear and see mixed opinions regarding the other groups. You'll also find the Crimson Fleet as well as other pirate groups, and you'll see many smaller factions within a lot of these major players and locations.
Hello there. Welcome to Ryujin Tower, the beating heart of Ryujin Industries. I'm Jupiter, the tower's secretary. Can I help you with something?
Like most Bethesda games, there are likely going to be a lot of plot points that start and end with the rivalries between these factions that you'll undoubtedly be the center of. Because, you're the hero. Conversations are a big part of Bethesda games. They are a method of progressing the game, discovering new opportunities, navigating situations, and finding new information. But the method it is done isn't really my favorite. The camera view tends to make things look less cinematic and a bit more staged. The way it switches back and forth between perspectives and often keeps the subject speaking to the camera can throw you off at first, though it doesn't happen in every conversation. Now, this is something that fans of Bethesda games are used to, but along with facial animations that aren't always the best, the conversations can leave something to be desired in terms of visuals. But functionality-wise, they are just as good as always. I do really enjoy the fact that my character always says what I select, and doesn't end up blabbering out something much more angry than I meant it to be.
You big stupid jellyfish.
Now that does come at the expense of a voiced protagonist, but I'm okay with that. And you're not going to be forced to go through each dialogue decision until you've found the one that advances the conversation. You get to choose your path through an encounter, sometimes repeating options, but most of the time navigating your way through the conversation as you see fit, and the game responds naturally. That being said, the best part of conversations is persuasion, which in this game is as cool as any other. You function on a point-based system that sees you filling up a bar to convince your conversational partner of what you need done. You'll need to judge that person, their personality, their setting, and what they want, making educated guesses on what tips the bar for them towards what you want. It's a little minigame of trial and error, but as you get better at it, it provides a very rewarding experience of navigating conflicts in a way that doesn't require your hard-earned bullets to enter somebody else's helmet. And it'll actually lead to a lot of missions concluding without any gunfire. This is also something that can correspond to a skill that you can keep progressing as you go forward. And in my opinion, this is one of the most fun parts of Bethesda games and Starfield as well. Quests in Starfield, which are called missions in a departure from previous Bethesda games, are very connective. They can come from anywhere, and they can spiderweb out into mission chains with many involved AI and storylines. While they don't always end up being the most significant experience, they still help to flesh out the universe, provide activity and backstory, and of course bring money and loot to the player. And much like previous Bethesda games and other significant RPGs like Red Dead Redemption 2, you'll find that they can pop up out of nowhere based on overheard conversations or random encounters with other spaceships. A fun example, not long into the game, I came across a job offer that took me to Neon. Here, I took a seemingly nondescript interview which led to simple errands for corporate employees of a major corporation, like running coffee. But from there I was rewarded a promotion which ultimately led to a career in corporate espionage. While I have not pursued this to its end, the simple missions this resulted in led to further activities, which spawned additional activities with other NPCs around the city and ultimately other connections that benefited me in different ways. Interestingly, one of those connections ended up coming up later in the game in a mainline quest. Unfortunately, this didn't appear to have much effect on that quest later though. A missed opportunity to really interweave narratives in my opinion. But this sort of connective nature of activities can really get you lost in the game. It can lead you down a path that you forget you're on for an hour or two, and then offer you a moment to breathe as you retrace your steps to close the loose ends and earn the rewards that you've already discovered. And while I haven't had the time to see how far these webs of missions can spread, and whether they consistently might take you off-world to unexplored moons and other planets, I can see the signs of more than just city-based storylines spawning from these encounters. And for a game that aims to take place across many worlds, this was pretty important to me. I do look forward to covering this more thoroughly in my full review and on my live streams in the month ahead though. Throughout the game, these missions will be split into general missions, faction-related missions, main storyline quests, and small activities that only take one or two actions like speaking to a certain person or going to a location, which, like I said, can actually spawn further missions. And while I'm only a couple dozen hours into the game, I've gone through enough to feel like there is a multitude of options to pursue between these selections. While I've been less hesitant to get into the faction-related missions specifically so far, besides that corporate espionage route, as I said in the beginning, the groundwork is continuously laid to breathe life into these factions to build a narrative that is hopefully as engaging as something like the Elder Scrolls Dark Brotherhood questlines. Like I alluded to, talking about skills and perks, your gameplay opportunities are also pretty diverse here. Now there's a lot of quick traveling and skipping over actions in this game. You can basically walk up to your ship's entrance and appear in your cockpit. In fact, you don't even need to walk up to your ship to get to the cockpit. It breaks the immersion for sure, but it saves time on something many players might consider unnecessary in a game like this. You can easily fast travel from your location to your ship, from one location to another, from planet to planet, And you can even be in a planet, in one system, in a room, click on another system, and immediately be on the ground in that location on a completely different planet. There's really not much attempt to maintain that immersion if you don't want to. Outside of running around specific locations and cities, this can be a game of click where you need to go. It does take place across light years of distance, but it puts some effort into contracting that space if you don't feel it's necessary. And that can go further than you think. For instance, if you land at an abandoned research outpost to attack pirates, the loading screen means that you don't know you're there. If you were flying there specifically yourself, you'd need to consider how your spaceship flying overhead might alert them or give them the jump on you. Many folks don't want to deal with something like that, but it certainly defines the atmospheric approach experience. The nice part is, like I've mentioned, every location seems to have a story. There's always some history and lore surrounding the locations and people who were there, as well as loot. And as it goes without saying, an actual location to visit many of the times you land. It can be something as simple as a fracking station with an audio log you need to turn in to some relative on a distant planet, but that's still something. And despite the hundreds of planets that are offering you thousands of kilometers to trek around on foot, always having the option of something is important. It may feel like a compacted space experience, but you're getting things to do almost everywhere you go because of it. I landed in 3 separate close proximity locations on the same moon and found things to do each time. You can also, of course, wait to pass the time if needed, much like other RPGs, skipping over what might otherwise be simulated time. This whole quick loading thing actually does take me a bit out of the wonder of moving through space. Just clicking a button to show up on the surface in the Sol system for the first time definitely lost some splendor compared to what I expected, as it really is just a button push to load into the new location. Docking to other ships or space stations, boarding those ships, landing your ship, even a single room, is sometimes sandwiched in between 2 different loading screens. It can be jarring. You actually barely have to see the interior of your ship while moving around, as you could just load into the cockpit. You also can't spacewalk outside of your ship at all. It's simply just not possible. But like I said, this is something that many players don't care about, and it's simply a design decision. Whether that's important or not is up to you. Speaking of movement, I do like that as you move around, you're dealing with oxygen rather than stamina. It works mostly the same way, with a bit of a grace period when your oxygen runs out and you start generating CO2. It allows the chance to optionally keep running, but risk taking some damage if you need to get that extra distance once your CO2 meter fills up. And this can obviously also be updated via skill investments. And then there's the gunplay in the game. It's middle of the park in my opinion. There are some fun aspects to it, and a good variety of weapons to engage with, but given the depth of customization that will expand the combat experiences, the jury is still out for me on how good it really is. I think it gets the job done as a supporting aspect of the game, but for those looking for a clean, deep, satisfying first-person shooter experience, it doesn't necessarily stack up to the major players just yet, in my opinion. As far as gameplay goes beyond these aspects, I have not had the chance to engage in much research or ship customization yet, so those aspects will be covered in later videos from me, as well as in my streams over the next month. There's something special about a space game. The vastness of space and planets within it, the hard sci-fi setting that calls for forethought and planning, the ability to host multiple homes for you and your crew across a multitude of biomes, and especially the constant danger that comes with the neighborhood. After a couple dozen hours in game though, you start to notice that Starfield succeeds and fails on several different aspects here, some of which we've already talked about. I really do appreciate the ability to customize your crew to your liking across your separate outposts and spaceships. While I haven't even touched outposts yet, as there is a lot to experience in this game, the different specialties between each character has made me think it'll be an interesting experience, and something that aims to highlight the difference between separate planets and the places that you'll be. But travel in this game is not really dangerous, it's actually pretty handholdy. Space exploration and travel are as easy as pressing a few buttons and watching the videos, like I said. And while you still need to be wary of things like fuel consumption and your grav drive range, these only really limit your actual travel range, which can be extended by skills, perks, and even your active crew. You can't actually run out of fuel. And I haven't run into a single problem with jump range after 20 hours in game yet. You won't find yourself too worried about keeping the ship running, as a single button press keeps you repaired, and separate commodities like food, water, or life support aren't needed to keep your crew or your ship up to standard. The game does still do a good job of creating heavy variation across the different planets and systems and cities that you visit though, but as you encounter different factions, when you jump into a new system, you're generally getting scanned by a faceless voice somewhere out there in space, rather than a physical entity that stops you to check if you have contraband and give you a sense of really getting held up in local space before you can move on.
This is Freestar Space. Please hold your current speed and heading while we scan you for contraband. And that's it. Enjoy Neon.
When you reach those planets, the unique features do stand out. I gotta take a second here to acknowledge how amazing this star map is. The details, the design, all of it really falls in line with the UI, which has been incredibly clean throughout the whole game. That's actually two parts of this game that I can't get over. The UI and audio design are snappy, clicky, and very satisfying. But when you do find a new planet, you can scan it to research the properties that determine its planet type, resource count, and the points of interest that are already charted. These details actually provide quite a bit of intrigue and correlate to various biomes on the planet. And once you've found a new point of interest on that planet, it will always be marked on your map as well. And while not every planet is all that interesting to visit, they mostly have something to do that's more shooty while you're scavenging for resources. And while you will come across some extreme conditions like extreme cold, toxicity, or extreme heat, that sense of urgency or survival is not quite as high as you might find in other space sims that take space mechanics more deep, though you will accrue afflictions from these extreme conditions that you may need to take care of via some kind of consumable. The planets themselves are also set up in a way that they feel small. What I mean by this is, besides the limited exploration due to a lack of vehicles and the inability to fly your ship around the planet in atmosphere, the lore even leaves something to be desired. I can leave Aquila City and trek a kilometer away to a pirate base, and there I'd find a data pad that would tell me that they have the second safest location on the entire planet. Crazy, considering how large planets are, that everything that's safe ended up being so centralized. Not a huge problem by any means, but it certainly acts to localize your idea of what the planet contains at scale. The planets don't necessarily feel repetitive, but I have yet to determine if the randomly spawned points of interest are enough to keep the casual player exploring much past the first 20 hours. Luckily, that's not a necessity to enjoy the game. Exploration is an option. You could just keep running missions. And this is definitely going to be a focus of one of my next videos on the game. In the end, the space vibes part of this space game falls a bit short for me. This isn't the most important part of the game by a long shot, but it is an important part of the genre to highlight the dangers and variations behind space travel, and I hope to discover more aspects that add to that as I continue through the game for my full review. What I feel we've received here is exactly what the space genre needed. I don't think this is a game for everybody. 2023 is an amazing year for new content to sink into. Starfield is just one part of that. This is not a space sim. It's not a walking simulator, and it's not going to satisfy a lot of our space cravings completely. But for a genre that has struggled to find its feet over the past decade, Starfield is the good medicine. This game will draw new players in, please old players of the genre and the studio, and open many up to a new type of game that actually has quite a bit of backing from other smaller titles. Starfield does not need mods to be a good game. It doesn't need updates to play well enough for casual players, and it doesn't need to change itself to be something it's not. I feel this is an adequate game to spend hundreds of hours in for some, and only dozens for others. It is scaled and paced in a way that I feel will provide many players with an experience they'll enjoy to the depth that they prefer. And in just the opening hours, it hints at a multitude of ways to go about that. As I said, there is still much more content surrounding this game to come from myself, including high quality guides, feature deep dives, podcast discussions, live streams, and of course, a full review. So I'll continue to provide you with information and entertainment if you're interested in subscribing here and on my second channel, Space Tomato 2. And as time passes, I hope you'll get the chance to experience this all for yourself. Because there are many things I didn't cover in this video that you should see for yourself, and there is a much bigger story at play here than any initial review will tell you. Thank you again for watching my first pseudo game review, and I'll see you in the Starfield.